Chapter 9. It was hard keeping the mood light as they sat around eating the sandwiches Norma had ordered in, but Richard was determined to try. He had plenty of assistance from Larry Rossdale, who could be counted on to bellow merry laughter at just about anything. Winston could tell, though, that people were disturbed. It was getting harder to ignore the fact that one of the party guests was a thief. At first, all attention once again turned to Zook, but under his father's questioning, Zook replied hotly, "When did I do it? I was with you the whole time, playing treasure hunt in the library. Besides, I'd have to be pretty stupid to steal money when everybody already thinks I stole this other thing, which I didn't." Everybody grudgingly agreed that Zook had been in the library during the entire puzzle. Of course, he could have stolen the money before then, but when Jared DeBra brought that up, Kimberly Schmidt observed that from the end of breakfast onward, there were always a few people in the reading room. Somebody would have seen him do it. Nobody knew what to say to that, and then lunch arrived, so the whole thing was dropped, at least for the moment. Zook was no longer glowering with anger, sitting next to his father in a pair of wingback chairs, a paper plate on his lap. He only looked tired of being accused of every bad thing that happened around here. Winston halfway felt bad for him and halfway thought he really was the thief. Chase Worthington had even gone so far as to offer Betty McGinley the money out of his own pocket, which made Zook exhale an irritated breath. Betty turned down the money. Winston and his friends were back at the dining room table. Derek Bibb was sitting there, and Mal, now that he had fully recovered from Derek's presence, wanted to ask the famous director questions about theater and acting. For the first time, it occurred to Winston that Mal wasn't joking about wanting to be an actor someday. Winston turned out of their conversation pretty quickly. He chatted in a low voice with Jake about Zook. Why would he have stolen the money? If indeed he had, his father was the star of a successful television show. Surely Zook could buy anything he wanted. And yet his father mentioned how Zook had been caught shoplifting not too long before. Whatever Zook was up to, it had nothing to do with money and everything to do with being an all-around ticked-off jerk. And really, if Zook wasn't the thief, who was? Everybody around here was richer than Winston could imagine. Did Jared DeBurr or even Amanda need $300 snatched from a random pocketbook? Heck no. DeBurr was a multi-bazillionaire businessman. Who did that leave as a suspect? The world-famous cello player? The theater director who with a play on Broadway? The weatherman who made barrels of money pitching products on television? It was crazy to think any of them had done it. Well, Penrose wasn't rich, but he probably wasn't poor either. Not if he traveled to other countries as frequently as he did. Even if Penrose was dead broke, said Jake, no way is he the thief, Winston agreed. Penrose? Rifling through somebody's wallet and stealing the cash? That was ridiculous. Winston was worried that maybe someone would turn the spotlight on him, or Mal, or Jake. Of all the guests in attendance, the three of them were the most likely to think $300 was a lot of money, and for a while they had been sitting in the same room as the purse. But, to Winston's relief, nobody thought to grill them about the theft. Most of the guests, taking a cue from Richard, only wanted to forget anything had happened. Winston glanced over to see that Derek was back in lecture mode. Again, this time for an audience of one. Mal looked a little glassy-eyed. He glanced over to his friends, and his expression asked the question, "What have I gotten myself into?" The deck of cards was still out. While they waited for Derek to wind down, Winston found himself cutting and shuffling the deck, and then idly flipping through the cards, removing some, putting others back into the deck, arranging things in some way. Jake watched him with increasing amusement. "Yeah," he said, "you can give up puzzles. I believe that." Winston looked at what he was doing and blinked in surprise. Jake was right. Winston had been absently turning the cards into a puzzle. His brain was on puzzling autopilot. Without moving these cards, can you divide them into two equal groups so that both groups have the same number of hearts and the same number of diamonds? Find the answer on page 245. The sun had come out, taking the edge off the morning's chill, and that was good, because the third puzzle was to be held outside in Richard Overton's extensive garden. "If we have to identify flowers," Gerald DeBurr said, "I'll just stay here and read the paper." Richard assured him it was nothing of the kind, so Gerard and the rest of them put on their jackets, grabbed pencils and paper, and gathered outside the front door. Norma stayed behind. She had taken Richard aside and suggested, in a whisper that was nonetheless loud enough for everyone to hear, that the rest of the puzzles be cancelled. Why continue with the party when one of the guests was a thief? Richard refused to listen. He led them around to the garden that Winston had spied from a distance last evening. Like Gerard, Winston didn't know many different kinds of flowers, but there seemed to be hundreds in Richard's garden. The entrance was guarded on either side by tall, odd-looking flowers in giant ceramic pots. Winston didn't realize it was possible for a flower to look proud of itself, but these purple flowers looked ready to sing their own praises. "Oh, these orchids are beautiful," Kimberly exclaimed, and Richard thanked her, obviously pleased. Next to each pot was a park bench, the wooden slats set into an ornate metal framework. In the garden itself, paths cut this way and that through the brightly colored flowers and the lush greenery, and Richard smiled as his guests oohed and awed at the sight of it all. "I had Freddie working double time over the last few weeks getting the garden ready for today," Richard said. "He's done a wonderful job, don't you think?" No one could disagree. Richard continued, "Here's another puzzle, where you'll have to wander around a little. You'll need to explore my garden in search of, well, you'll find out soon. Then it will be up to you to figure out what to do. Make sure you follow every path. Your answer will be a 6-letter word, but keep these numbers in mind as well. 9, 8, 6. That's a little hint for all of you." "Not much of a hint," Mal said to Winston. 9, 8, 6? What does it mean?" "I guess we'll see," said Winston. "Want to stick together?" Jake asked. "Sure thing," Mal said. So the boys headed down one of the paths. "Learn a lot from Derek Bibb?" Winston asked. "Oh, man," Mal said, looking around to see if Derek was nearby. "The guy's really smart, no doubt about that, but talking to him is like sinking in quicksand." "Next time we'll throw you a rope," Jake said. It didn't take long to discover what Richard was up to. Down the first path was a little clearing. In the center was a wooden post with a sign showing a single letter, O. "Aha!" said Mal. "I know what to do for a change. It's a maze, and we have to spell out a message as we go along." "That sounds pretty good," Winston said, "but which way are we supposed to go now?" There were 4 paths out of this clearing. The one they had come from, the three others heading off at various angles into the garden. "Hey, I'm just the idea man," said Mal. "I'll let you take it from here." So they headed down a path at random, looking at different kinds of plants until they reached another clearing and another signpost. This one displayed the letter N. Jake wrote it diligently on his notepad. Winston wasn't taking notes yet. He needed to see more before he felt confident they were on the right track. There were 3 paths away from this point, and again they chose one for no particular reason. This time they found themselves in a slightly larger clearing, though still with a single signpost at the center. Jake wrote down the letter E in his notepad. The E, Winston noticed, was larger than the other letters, and painted red instead of black. It also had a red circle painted around it. "Wow, now what?" Jake said, looking around. There were no fewer than 7 paths leading away. "We're supposed to take every path. Isn't that what he said?" Winston asked. "Yes," Mal agreed. "Quick, everybody clone yourself." Candace DeBurr and Amanda came up from one of the other paths. Gerard wasn't with them. Winston remembered that Gerard had worked by himself during the library puzzle too. Did he not want to solve with his wife and daughter, or did they not want to work with him? Amanda looked around at the many paths and made an annoyed sound. "How are we supposed to know where to go next?" "I think that's part of the puzzle," Jake said. "Well, it's hard to believe I'm going to solve this," said Amanda's mother, "but this garden is certainly lovely. Oh, look!" She stepped happily over to examine a bunch of flowers that resembled lavender-colored popcorn, while Amanda stood there looking impatient. "Come on, let's keep going," Jake said, and chose the next path for them. It led to a sign marked with a V, and there was only one way to continue out of that clearing, so they kept going straight until they reached another sign. This one with a capital letter I. Derek Bibb and Mr. Penrose were here, examining the sign closely, like it contained a whole secret language instead of a single letter. Mal, formerly Derek's biggest fan, looked worried. But the lecture was officially over. The theater director was now interested only in the puzzle. Penrose was shaking his head. "I don't see that we're spelling anything useful." Could it be something else? Asked Derek. Perhaps we need to travel to each letter in order. Penrose frowned. How would that work? He asked. We have an S and an I in consecutive clearings. Last I checked, they aren't next to each other in the alphabet. You found an S? Jake asked. Yes, up that way, Derek said, pointing. Where did you boys come from? From that-a-way, Mal said, gesturing behind them. There's a V back there. There was only one other way out of this clearing. Shrugging, Derek said, Shall we? So the 5 of them marched down the path. Winston noticed for the first time that all of these pathways were perfectly straight, not a curve to be seen anywhere. Was that important? Maybe, although Winston couldn't see how. They arrived at a clearing. The sign here showed the letter L. Evil! Shouted Mal, so suddenly that everybody jumped. He's right, Jake said. We just spelled the word evil, except before that we had an O and an N. On evil, Mal said. I don't know what it means, but it's got to be something. Derek said, but we took a different set of paths and have a completely different set of letters. Who's to say who was right? What letters do you have? Winston asked. T, S, I, and now L, Penrose said, referring to his notepad. At least our letters spell something, said Mal. There was only one other path out of here, so they kept going. The boys walked slower than usual because Penrose's jogging days were behind him. As they walked, Jake said to Winston, So tell me, you're not enjoying this? Winston knew what Jake was getting at. He shrugged. I am. Of course I am. So you still want to give up puzzles? Penrose looked at them, his eyes wide behind his glasses. What is this? He asked. Mal said, Winston wants to give up puzzles and become a football player or something. I never said anything about being a football player, Winston said a little too loudly. I don't want to give up puzzles either, he said, and then surprised himself by adding, I don't think. He didn't really want to talk about this and wished Jake and Mal would stop bringing it up. His own thoughts were still too confused. His friend sensed this and backed off. So did Penrose, though the curious and concerned expression did not leave his face. They arrived at the next clearing, and Jake said, Whoops. Whoops what? Whoops, we've been here before. He pointed at the O on the signpost. This is the first letter we saw. They all thought about that. Derek said, It's not the first letter we saw. Our first letter was a T. I think it's over this way. He pointed down the path that led back to the garden's entrance. Beyond that, the path continued into another clearing. So that way is the T, Mal said. This way is the N that we already saw. We just came from the L in this direction. That leaves one more path out of here. He pointed and the group continued to walk together. This path didn't go on for very long before they reached another clearing. The sign here said P. Looking at it, Derek said, I think it would be splendid if I had some idea what I was doing. We have to spell something, said Penrose. Don't you think? Sure, said Jake, but there are a million ways to take these different paths. We could be walking in here forever. Hey, we spelled the word evil, Mal reminded him. Jake shook his head. I think we just got lucky. I don't think that means anything. Wait, Winston said. Don't forget about the hint he gave us. What were those numbers again? 986, Mal said. Winston nodded. So the answer is going to be 3 words. A 9-letter word? Jake got it. Then an 8-letter word. Then a 6-letter word. Right. How does that help us figure out what the answer is? Mal asked. Here's what I think, Winston said. And he flipped to a new page in his notepad. He spent some time scribbling letters in circles. I've seen this kind of puzzle before, he said. Just not life-size. So it took me a while to recognize it. Here's how a puzzle like this would work on paper. Starting from one of the circles, Winston said, you can trace out the name of a large city and the state it's in. Both the city and the state are 7 letters long. You'll use every pathway at least once. Find the answer on page 246. So it's not enough to walk around the garden looking at letters, Derek Bibb said. We have to make a map? Yes, I think so, said Winston. The letters and the paths. Yikes, said Mal, looking around. They all contemplated the difficulty of the task ahead, and then Penrose clapped sharply. Well, the best way to start is to start, wouldn't you say? Maybe we should split up, Jake said. Exactly what I was going to suggest, said Derek. We can head off in various directions, then meet back here, or at the entrance. Yes, let's meet back at the garden entrance in 15 minutes and compare notes. There were 5 of them and only 3 passed out of the clearing, so they broke into smaller groups. Derek went off on his own, Jake and Mal went another way, and Penrose and Winston took the third path. So, what were your friends talking about? Penrose asked as they walked. Something about not wanting to solve puzzles anymore? That's hard to believe. Winston didn't want to get into it all over again. The trouble with his teachers missing out on the Adventureland. So he said, I don't know. I guess I wondered what it would be like to do something different. Like what? Well, Winston said, that was the problem, wasn't it? He had no idea. Penrose saw the blankness on Winston's face and smiled. I think you might wait to give up your passion until something comes along to replace it. My opinion is, you can't wake up one morning and decide to become a stamp collector or a gardener, he said, sweeping an arm at the greenery around them. You have to want to do these things on a deeper level. He made an old wrinkled fist and tapped himself several times below his ribcage. I guess that's true, Winston said. Right at the moment, he wasn't sure what he wanted. They walked through a few clearings, and Winston carefully noted down the letters and the paths. Penrose then said he was getting tired, and he would meet Winston back at the garden entrance. I'm glad we are working on something together, Winston, he said. I was hoping we would before the weekend was over. He shuffled off. Winston could now go a lot faster, and did. He got interested looks. What is he up to? From Gerard and Kimberly as he raced past them, trying to run and write in his notebook at the same time. Whether or not he'd be solving puzzles tomorrow, he was certainly enjoying this one right now. He didn't get to cover every path, but he did pretty well, and he arrived back at the garden entrance with a good idea of how the map would work. The brats were there, being reprimanded, not by their mother, but by Derek. His lecture this time was not about theater, but about manners. The boys, downcast, were sitting on one of the benches, their hands and faces covered in dirt. They'd been having a dirt fight, throwing clumps of soil from the 2 large flower pots at each other. One of the 2 orchids was leaning to the side, fainting it in slow motion. Penrose sat on the other bench, shaking his head in disbelief. Betty came running out of the garden. Oh, no, she said. I stepped away for less than 5 minutes. I'm so sorry. She looked at the damaged orchid and seemed almost about to cry. Then she rounded on her boys. Didn't I ask you to behave? Can't I leave you for a minute? You get back to the house right now. We are getting you washed up. And when we get back home, the 2 of you are going to be punished. She continued in this vein for some time until both boys started crying. It was a relief when the 3 of them left for the house. Richard had insisted she come, sure, but how much game playing did Betty McGinley think she was going to do this weekend with those 2 travel-sized demons alongside her? What a shame, Derek said of the fallen flower. He tried straightening it up, to no avail. Richard came out of the garden looking concerned, and Winston saw his face fall when he saw a damaged orchid. Betty's kids, Derek said to him, and that was all the explanation Richard needed. Richard prodded at the plant. It's not uprooted, just tilting. It'll live until Freddie gets back on Monday. What a shame. He turned to the few of them gathered there. How are you all doing on this? I think Winston here has us on the right track, said Derek. We shall see. Mal and Jake came running out of the garden, stopping just short of bowling over Richard. He stepped aside laughing. Now this is the sort of enthusiasm I was hoping to see from kids this weekend. Betty's boys are certainly enthusiastic, Derek replied. Yes, Richard said, nodding at the dark joke. Aren't they, though? He was no longer comparing the brat's exuberation to himself at that age. Excuse me, I'm going to see how the others are faring. He disappeared back into the garden. Mal and Jake and Winston grouped themselves together on the grass, working and reworking their map. Derek came over and contributed his own notes. Winston scribbled, erased, scribbled some more, and soon they believed they had the whole map sketched out. They brought it over to the bench where Penrose was sitting, and together the 5 of them started at it. This is somewhat larger than your example, Derek said to Winston. Yeah, Winston said, but we know we're looking for 3 words, and the lengths of the words will be 9, 8, and 6. And I think we have to start on the E. The E? Jake asked. Why the E? Do you remember? It was painted red instead of black, and had a big circle painted around it. I think that was another hint. That's the starting point. Continue reading to see the answer to this puzzle. Explosive! Mal shouted, and again everybody jumped. Sorry, he said sheepish, noticing their glares, but that's 9 letters starting with E. You can't make the word explosive, Winston said, tracing it out on the map. There's no way from the P to the L, and the only way from the O to the S is through the N. Well, nuts, Mal squinted again at the map. I like X anyway, said Jake. So do I, said Derek. E, X, P, said Penrose. Expo, Winston said. Or we can go back to the E again. Expensive? He traced it out. Expensive works. Silence fell among the group again. Pawn, Jake said. Pot, Winston said. Polish, said Penrose. But no, it has to be 8 letters, doesn't it? Polished, then. Mal pointed at the map. Polished is right there. Which paths do we still have to use? Asked Derek. Winston made the appropriate marks on the paper. But don't forget that a path can be used more than once. Never mind. I see the final word, said Jake. He traced it out. Stones. They all exchanged looks. Expensive, polished, stones? Mal said. That's the answer? It's a clue to the answer, said Penrose, and the answer is 6 letters. So the answer must be jewels, Winston whispered.